There are some other things you need to check when you buy a hybrid vehicle. In fact, this is something you absolutely need to know. The hybrid powertrain is similar. With the electric motor assisting the engine, hybrid technology is all about improving fuel efficiency.
That's correct up to that point.
But the reason you really need to test drive it might not just be about the ride comfort. It's actually something that can feel even more luxurious. But what about the vehicles sold in Korea? There are just parallel hybrid systems from domestic brands like Hyundai or Kia, and as for Gran Koleos, BYD and KGM, they use a series parallel system. The fact that the names are different means their roles are also different. So, what's the difference between the two systems? I think the easiest way to understand is to ask, who works harder? If it's an internal combustion engine, does the engine we know work harder? Or in a hybrid, does the key component, the electric motor, work harder? Depending on this, the feeling is completely different. Why is that? The engine of an internal combustion vehicle produces a lot of vibration and noise. So, what about the motor? An electric motor is different from an engine. In an engine, to generate power, the cylinders go through processes like explosion and compression, which ultimately create power for the car. But an electric motor doesn't have these processes. Regardless of whether it's a 6, 8 or 10 cylinder, an internal combustion engine can never be as quiet or have less vibration than an electric motor. So, with a hybrid system, whether the electric motor does more work or the engine does more work, the driving feel changes completely depending on that.
So then, what about the two systems?
What are the differences between them? Technically, there's a motor in the transmission. No, actually, there's a planetary gear, and a sun gear exists as well. Experts explain it like this, but it's too difficult for the average consumer to understand. So, I'll explain it to you in a really simple way. First, you've heard that domestic manufacturers use the parallel hybrid system, right? What does this mean? Let me explain with a diagram. There's a dad, and the dad represents the engine. The wife is labeled as the motor. If you look at their legs, both are connected by a single chain. So, to put the parallel system simply, you can think of it as a tandem bicycle, where both people pedal together. If we express this in terms of a car's power, if the dad, that is the engine, is powerful, you can use that great force at low or high speeds to accelerate smoothly and drive fast. On the other hand, it's a bit inefficient for the dad, that is the engine, to charge the battery through the wife, the motor, while driving. Since everything is connected in a single chain like this, even if she wants to rest, the wife still has to keep pedaling. Since our subscribers are smart, I'll explain the series parallel system easily now. A bicycle has appeared, but think of this bicycle as an electric bicycle that's been popular recently. What's the biggest difference between an electric bicycle and a regular bicycle? You can ride it using the power of the motor, and if the battery runs out, you can still ride it by pedaling. Also, depending on whether the battery also drives the wheels, we can divide it into parallel and series parallel structures. There's a transmission between the engine and the motor, and this method is called the parallel type. On the other hand, in the series parallel type, there is an engine and a motor, and you can see a power split device in the middle. This is commonly called a planetary gear. Simply put, it can attach or detach the gears to distribute power. So, compared to the parallel type, if you look at series parallel vehicles, you can see various ways the energy flows. In terms of domestic vehicles, Renault uses this method, and KGM also has a series parallel hybrid system. I explained this in detail in my Torres hybrid test drive video, so just listen to the differences in how each system operates. If you drive a hybrid vehicle, you'll see an energy flow chart. The Torres hybrid offers a total of 9 driving modes. The first is the battery drive mode, which uses the energy stored in the battery. This is how it works. It's a mode that operates like a fully electric vehicle. The second mode charges the battery through regenerative braking as the wheels turn while driving. When these two modes are operating, the EV mode is clearly displayed on the dashboard. At this time, since not a single drop of fuel is consumed, you can sometimes see it showing up to 99.9 km per litre. In other words, if you make good use of these two modes, you can become the king of fuel efficiency. The third is a mode where the engine charges the battery, and then the vehicle operates using the charged energy. The fourth is a mode where the battery is charged through both the engine and regenerative braking. In this case, since the engine is running, fuel is consumed. Fifth, if the vehicle is stopped, the wheels do not turn. In this case, the mode where the engine charges the battery is what you see now, the sixth mode, which is the hybrid mode where the vehicle runs using both the energy stored in the battery and the engine drive. Seventh, the vehicle is driven by engine power, and this is the mode where the engine charges the battery through the drive motor. Eighth, this is the mode where the battery is charged through regenerative braking. Lastly, the ninth mode is where only the engine is used to drive for maximum efficiency. Saving fuel, actively using EV mode in a hybrid vehicle also brings quite a bit of enjoyment from saving fuel. Coming back to the bicycle image, when you drive in the city using the battery to power the motor, it just feels like an electric car. So even if they're both hybrid vehicles, there can be differences in driving feel. That's why you've probably heard this a lot. Our hybrid is a hybrid system that's close to an electric car. And on the other hand, some say our hybrid is closer to an internal combustion engine. These are the values of the two approaches. This is the biggest difference. The most noticeable part is when you need a lot of power, like during acceleration or going up a hill. In a series parallel system, there is a component that distributes power between the engine and the motor, while in a parallel system, the biggest difference is that the motor is located between the engine and the transmission. Of course, if there is a component that splits the power, depending on the situation, sometimes only the engine generates power or the motor's power is combined to drive the wheels together. And when the battery is fully charged, the engine rests and the car runs smoothly using only the motor. That's why series parallel hybrid vehicles always include this type of description. Our car runs on the motor, powered by the battery, like an electric vehicle for 70% or even over 90% of the time in the city. So when you test drive it, you describe it as a hybrid that's close to an electric vehicle. Then, what's the difference when the battery is low? In a parallel system, the engine runs more. And in the parallel system, the driving force is delivered directly to the wheels. But in the series parallel system, instead of directly turning the wheels, it spins a generator next to it. Then, the electricity generated here is used to power the motor or charge the battery. Now, do you see the differences a bit more clearly? In the parallel system, everything is tied together in one chain, so everything works together as one, but the engine's role is really important. On the other hand, in the series parallel system, the power can be separated, so the engine can assist as a generator. So, which system is better in terms of fuel efficiency? Of course, the series parallel system, which can handle a wider variety of scenarios, generally has better fuel efficiency. If you compare the Santa Fe and the Gran Koleos, you'll see that with the same 20-inch wheels, the Koleos has slightly better fuel efficiency. Not only in the official fuel efficiency figures from the manufacturers, but also in real-world fuel efficiency, the series parallel system tends to be a bit better. So, does that mean the series parallel system is always better? No, it has its advantages, but there are definitely disadvantages as well. I mentioned that the parallel system is tied together in one chain, right? That's why the parallel system has a simple structure. There's a transmission between the engine and the motor, and this setup is as simple as a traditional internal combustion engine vehicle, so it feels more familiar. And when you press the pedal, you get an immediate response. On the other hand, in the series parallel system, the power distribution device makes the structure more complex, but the efficiency is higher. Also, it has become smoother, like an electric car. However, when I say it's smoother, it means that at low speeds, the sense of torque, and at high speeds, the sense of acceleration are relatively lower compared to the parallel system. So, even if you just compare the 0 to 100 time of the two systems, you can see that the parallel system is a bit faster. Today, I divided the explanation into two types to make it easier for you to understand, but if you look in detail, there are also differences in the position of the motor and the type of transmission. Also, since technology is constantly advancing, even Hyundai Motor Group, which represents the parallel system in Korea, introduced a next-generation hybrid system last year, making further improvements. So, please don't argue about whether this is right or wrong. If you feel the need to debate, just know that your opinion is always correct. So, to sum up, if you prefer the driving fun of an internal combustion engine, you should choose the parallel system. On the other hand, if you prefer the smooth driving feel of an electric car, the series parallel system would also be a good choice. If you want to automatically receive the next updates without waiting, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thank you. If this was helpful, please give it a like, subscribe and turn on notifications to get accurate new car information quickly. Thank you.